So you have a strong suspicion that you are anxious preoccupied. This conclusion is often the first one that people come to if they have a strong abandonment wound when they are first learning about attachment theory. While some people who come to this conclusion truly are anxious preoccupied, many people who come to this conclusion are actually fearful avoidant. So, how do you determine if you're anxious preoccupied or fearful avoidant? In this video, I will take a deep dive into a couple of factors and help you to figure out if you truly are anxious preoccupied or if you're actually fearful avoidant. Real quick, if you're new here, my name is Sarah Whaling and I'm a certified life, trauma, and relationship coach. I am a former fearful avoidant who started my own healing work years ago. And then I got my certifications and I used my personal and professional experience with what actually works in healing. I tailor personalized plans for my clients to heal insecure attachment styles, healing from childhood trauma, heal wounds from relationships early in life or later in life with individuals with personality disorders that were damaging, and heal everyday pain points such as procrastination and mastery over your boundaries, all with incorporating the subconscious and unconscious mind, which is how we truly heal because that is where trauma is stored. If you're interested in one-on-one telephone coaching, please send me a detailed message on my website via the contact page, and you'll receive a follow-up email which will include my session information. Now, jumping into today's topic. So, the first thing that needs to be said is a deep abandonment wound does not determine if you're anxious preoccupied rather than fearful avoidant. Many fearful avoidants, especially those who lean more anxious, have just as strong of an abandonment wound as anxious preoccupieds. This is the reason why this attachment style mistake is very often made. Many fearful avoidants can have a very intense, very painful, extremely deep abandonment wound. This deep pain from the abandonment wound can lead people to draw what they think is the only reasonable conclusion, that they are anxious preoccupied. An extremely common scenario that I see over and over and over again is that someone who is fearful avoidant gets into a relationship with or dates someone who is dismissive avoidant, and that pushes them into the anxious side of their attachment style. Because it is important to remember, fearful avoidants have both anxious core wounds and avoidant core wounds, and anxious wounds can be more obvious than avoidant wounds. The juxtaposition of dating someone who is dismissive avoidant and the fearful avoidant being in their anxious side leads the fearful avoidant to feel like they are very anxious and therefore must be anxious preoccupied when that is not the case. So, how do you determine if you are anxious preoccupied or fearful avoidant? Let's dive into the important factors. Factor number one, the childhood relationship to your parents or caregivers. Anxious preoccupieds and fearful avoidants have important differences to note when it comes to their childhood relationship to their parents or caregivers. The most important thing to examine is your childhood relationship to the caregivers who were closest to you. For example, let's say that your parents divorced. Whichever parent you lived with is going to be the most impactful when it comes to your attachment imprinting. So, what is the major difference in the anxious preoccupied's relationship to their parents or caregivers and the fearful avoidance relationship to their parents or caregivers? It boils down to one word: safety. Anxious preoccupieds generally felt safe mentally, emotionally, and physically when in the presence of their caregivers. Anxious preoccupieds felt unsafe when their caregivers were not around. They experienced inconsistency only with their caregiver's presence. An important difference to note between anxious preoccupieds and fearful avoidants is that the anxious preoccupied experience inconsistency in the caregiver's presence, whereas the fearful avoidant quite often experience inconsistencies with the caregiver or caregiver's behavior and possibly also their presence. So we have established that anxious preoccupieds felt safety in the presence of their caregivers. Fearful avoidants, however, experience regular instances of feeling unsafe around their caregivers. They either felt mentally, emotionally, and or physically unsafe around their caregivers on a regular basis. Now, this can be off and on, like maybe the fearful avoidant had a parent who abused alcohol, for example, and that parent acted loving towards the fearful avoidant when the parent was sober, but angry and unpredictable when the parent was drinking. It can be that the parent treated them poorly off and on, depending on if the parent was having a bad day. But that inconsistent safety in and of itself felt unsafe because it was not dependable, and that caregiver or caregivers were unpredictable. Fearful avoidants quite often experience a lot of unpredictability, and it makes sense that this is the only attachment style whose only attachment strategy is hypervigilance, which is a hyper focus on your environment and the people around you, looking for any changes in patterns, micro expressions that people have, trying to read people's vibes all the time, hyper focused outwardly. And when that is going on, there's not a lot of room to focus inwardly on what is going on within themselves in real time. Being able to read their environment and adapt quickly was the fearful avoidance attachment strategy. Fearful avoidance can also feel that for these reasons, that a place of safety is when they're able to just be by themselves, escape with themselves, and focus on themselves like they aren't able to do around others before they heal, away from the caregivers or caregiver who made them feel unsafe. Anxious preoccupieds are not going to feel that way. Factor number two, nuances of the abandonment wound. As mentioned, fearful avoidance can have a very deep abandonment wound, just like anxious preoccupieds. I'm going to note something very important before I talk about factor number two. Fearful avoidance can quite often experience the abandonment core wound the same way that anxious preoccupieds can, as just simply the abandonment wound on its own. That being said, in addition to experiencing the abandonment wound on its own, fearful avoidance can experience a version of the abandonment wound that has a betrayal twist to it. This is because the majority of the time, one of the fearful avoidance top core wounds, if not number one core wound, is the betrayal core wound, the I cannot trust or the I will be betrayed core wound. When it comes to the abandonment core wound, it can kind of blend with the betrayal wound for the fearful avoidant. An example to illustrate one way that this can look is that maybe the fearful avoidance partner is out and doesn't text them back. While an anxious preoccupied might feel like the partner is losing interest and going to leave them, the fearful avoidant might feel like the partner is losing interest and going to leave them, and or because their partner is out with someone else or they met someone else while out. So you can see how the betrayal wound or the trust wound can put a twist on the abandonment wound. Having an extremely strong trust core wound is a huge North Star that you have a fearful avoidant attachment style rather than an anxious preoccupied attachment style. Factor number three, how conflict is handled. Anxious preoccupieds and fearful avoidants handle conflict differently. When a fearful avoidant is hurt or triggered, they can push someone away quite strongly. What's going on is that subconsciously, a fearful avoidant is really trying to push the pain away. During conflict in their relationships, anxious preoccupieds really won't do this in the way that fearful avoidants do. An anxious preoccupied is not likely to do things that put the attachment in jeopardy because their subconscious mind puts priority on nearly always seeking closeness. It is subconsciously survival oriented for them because of their attachment style. The anxious preoccupied's trauma response will commonly be the fawn response. If you aren't familiar with the four trauma responses, they are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. While the anxious preoccupied might get into a fight with their partner, they will be quick to try to smooth it over and keep proximity to their partner intact. Now, can fearful avoidants have the fawn trauma response? Yes, absolutely, especially if, for instance, they're in an unhealthy dynamic that has conditioned them to do so, such as experiencing narcissistic abuse. But fearful avoidants have very commonly a trauma response that anxious preoccupieds do not have, and that is the fight trauma response. This goes right along with pushing someone away quite strongly, as mentioned, when someone has hurt the fearful avoidant, and this obviously doesn't put proximity as their priority in that moment. Subconsciously, it puts their safety at the forefront by gaining distance from what is causing them pain. This is obviously an avoidance strategy and something that you won't see with an anxious preoccupied. Factor number 4, differences in independence. A common strong theme that you will see for fearful avoidance is a love for their independence. They can often, not always the case, but often be fiercely independent and enjoy their alone time, need alone time, and view their alone time as a safe space. They might love solo travel because this blends the fearful avoidance love for their independence with their love for exploration, passion for life, and excitement or novelty, which tend to be some things commonly found high on a fearful avoidance personality needs list. If you are a fearful avoidant or are curious about how the fearful avoidant's relationship to their independence is formed, I encourage you to check out my video, Core Memories Fearful Avoidants Have About Their Independence, in which I take a deep dive into fearful avoidant attachment style and independence. You really won't see this strong independence with an anxious preoccupied. In fact, they will often view solo activities and a relationship with themselves subconsciously as a threat to their relationship with others because it takes time away from that, and they won't make proper time for that relationship with themselves, which actually does a lot to reinforce their insecure, anxious attachment style, but that's a whole separate topic. Well, I hope that this video has been helpful for you in determining between anxious preoccupied attachment style and fearful avoidant attachment style. If this was valuable to you, please give it a like, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell if you haven't so you can be notified of future content just like this. Thank you for making it to the end of this video, and thank you for being here. Take care.